Hey y'all, it's Mr. Delot again, and today we're going to be talking about Manifest Destiny and expansion a little bit from 5.2, and then talk a little bit more about specifically Southern Manifest Destiny ideas from Unit 5.4. So we'll be bouncing around just a little bit, but that's what we're going over. So first off, we've been talking about Manifest Destiny for a while, right? We've talked about how since even colonial times, American settlers had wanted to move west across the Appalachian Mountains, and then west across the Mississippi, and now west across the Great Plains, all the way to the Pacific Ocean, right? And a lot of the people that wanted to expand were for nationalist reasons. A lot of the people that wanted to expand American control were for cultural reasons, like they believed in American cultural superiority, and they believed in the idea of spreading civilization, as we saw in this political cartoon right here, right, with Manifest Destiny personified as bringing the symbolic light of American civilization with the railroads, the telegraph lines, bringing farmers in, and then driving out both Native Americans and the bison as well. And then there's also a lot of people from the South that wanted to expand land as well, mostly for the expansion of slavery. And so, as we've talked about, one of the big reasons the Civil War happens is because of the argument over whether or not slavery expands into all this new Western territory. And especially after the Mexican-American War, when we get the Mexican cession, that's a big deal. And then there are some Southerners that start pushing down even into Latin America, where they feel like the climate is right for plantation agriculture and plantation economies to really take hold easily. And some of these places in Latin America have been doing plantation agriculture and slave-based agriculture for centuries, right? Like Cuba would be one big example. So first thing I'm going to talk about real quick is the Ostend Manifesto. This is just an incident where essentially the United States tries to buy Cuba. This is while James K. Polk is president. He offers to buy the entire island of Cuba from Spain, and he offered him $100 million. And I want you to think about the fact that we only paid $15 million for Mexico, $15 million for all of the Mexican cession, and $15 million again for Louisiana. So $100 million just for Cuba. It's a pretty nice price for the time period, and Spain completely refuses. They actually said that they would rather sink Cuba beneath the waves than see her in the hands of the United States. So when Spain shoots our offer down, there are some Southerners that decide to try and essentially take over Cuba anyway. There's a couple of different essentially adventurers that go down there and try to take Cuba by force, and of course those are easily defeated by Spain, and the basically they're rebels and invaders, and so they get captured, they get executed, and this is all during the 1840s, 50s, and even kind of during the Civil War. So we've got Polk trying to buy it, a few people trying to take it over by force, and then in 1852, when Franklin Pierce gets elected, he was pretty pro-Southern in his policies in general, and so he tries to get Cuba again. He sends 3 diplomats to Ostend, Belgium, to try and make a deal where they secretly buy Cuba from Spain. That's why it's called the Ostend Manifesto. And when they write all this up and it comes out, when it leaks to the public, it looks like the South is trying to expand slavery, which is exactly what's happening. And so when the press releases all this information, a lot of people got really, really mad from who were anti-slavery congressmen. Abolitionists in the North were livid. And ultimately, they put a lot of pressure on Pierce until he drops the attempt to buy Cuba. Another place that Southerners were interested in attempting to expand slavery to was Nicaragua, just because, again, there's sugar plantations there already, and the climate is right for growing stuff like that. And there's a guy named William Walker who goes down with essentially an army of Southerners to take over Nicaragua in 1855. He personally leads this little band of basically mercenaries. And at one point, he even takes over the entire government of Nicaragua, and while Pierce was still president, he recognized William Walker as the legitimate government of Nicaragua for a little while. It's just that his whole scheme was basically this pro-slavery plan to go and take over Nicaragua, turn it into a giant plantation, and essentially they also have this scheme to steal a bunch of money from the Nicaraguan people and everything. And so the Nicaraguans themselves rise up against William Walker, and some other countries nearby invade and overthrow him, and he gets executed by the Honduran government after they go in to help the Nicaraguans. So that one fails too. But the point is that they're attempting to spread slavery by force, literally. And again, this is going to be one of the big contention points where Northerners get upset because Southerners keep trying to go and circumvent Congress and take over new territory, whether it's by diplomatic or military means. Now, two other examples of expansion, or at least American influence spreading down into Latin America. We got the Clayton-Bulwer Treaty of 1850. And this is essentially the thing that's going to set up the Panama Canal much later. But we wanted to build a canal through Central America. There were a lot of countries interested in that, mostly the United States, Britain, and France, because it makes sense, right? If you build some kind of canal where ships can pass through it, you can shave off literally months of travel, basically cut the distance in half to go from the Pacific to the Atlantic, or from Europe to Asia and so on, or from New York to California for that matter, right? We got a lot of interest in building a canal in Central America. So does Britain, so does France. And so kind of what happens is that there's a deal made between us and Britain to check each other's power. We agree to this treaty, Clayton-Bulwer, and we said that neither one of us, Britain or the United States, would attempt to build a canal without the other one. And this actually kind of keeps, we keep that agreement all the way until 1901, when the United States gets the sole claim to the Panama Canal, and ultimately we start building it, and it was owned and operated by the United States from its opening in 1914 until 1999, when we gave it back to Panama. But we're making treaties about it just to try and stop Britain and France and the United States from essentially having to fight over who gets to build the canal. France also attempted to build a canal through Nicaragua in the 1850s, but they failed, and we'll talk about that later. Might not have been the 1850s, but it doesn't matter. And then the last thing for expansion in the southern United States, we also have another land purchase. This time so that we can build a railroad across the entire Southwest. This is the last piece of the puzzle for the continental United States. And it's called the Gadsden Purchase. This is probably the only legitimately good thing that Pierce does for the country as president, where he adds this little strip of land in the Southwest that you can see on this map right here. And it's not a huge amount of territory, but basically what happened was they were trying to build a couple of different transcontinental railroads out west, from the east to the west. And they had one that was going to go through the middle of the country, and then there was a southern route they were looking at, but the land we had wasn't very favorable for railroad building. It was mountainous and hilly, and the soil was bad. And so they buy this little strip of land from Mexico so they can build the railroad more easily through the south. And ultimately we pay Mexico $10 million for that little piece of land. Again, think about how much of a deal we got because of the way we beat them in the Mexican War, right? Guadalupe Hidalgo gives us the entire Mexican cession down there for only $15 million, and then we get that little piece of Gadsden Purchase for $10 million. That little bit of New Mexico and Arizona. Shows you, one, how important it is for us to be able to build a railroad down there, and two, how easily we were able to enforce our demands on Mexico in that treaty. So anyway, shifting into 5.2, I know we're going back a little bit. I do want to talk about some Western expansion and what it looks like on the early frontier in the West as well. Hold on. There we go. Tackling fuel. So anyway, we've already talked about Americans moving west, right? And in the 1840s, 50s, and 60s, the last couple decades leading up to the Civil War, there's a ton of people that start moving west. Not nearly as many as after the Civil War, when the Transcontinental Railroad and Homestead Act and everything play a big role in it, but still a lot. And the reason that it's fewer than it will be later is because it's hard to get out there, right? We're still talking about wagon trails and things that are going over land. We're still talking about a region that is disconnected from the rest of the country, technologically, physically, right? And that area between the Mississippi River and the Pacific Ocean, the Great Plains and the Rocky Mountains and all that, some people at the time were calling that the Great American Desert, because it was a harsher environment and it was much more sparsely populated than anywhere back east was, right? But the area along the west coast, which is going to be Oregon and California, that was much more inviting. The climate's milder, you have access to trade on the ocean and everything. And so there were a lot of people that braved the so-called desert, that crossed it in order to get to the inviting kind of economic opportunity and everything on the west coast. So there's not really many Great Plains farmers or anything yet. That'll come after the Civil War. So who's out there in the West first, right? One group we've already covered quite a bit is the mountain men and the fur traders. This was the earliest group of American settlers to go west, and they worked mostly with Native Americans in the Rocky Mountains and so on, and trapping furs, and very similar to the earliest French explorers, right? They've got to be able to work with the Indians because the Indians are most of the people that are out there. But these mountain men are the ones who also established a lot of the early trails and everything, right? They serve as pathfinders to other settlers. There's a ton of guys that are really famous for this, like Jim Bridger, Kit Carson was another one, James Beckworth, Hugh Glass, like the guy that's in the movie The Revenant. Like I said, they're the ones that tell everybody first where the trails are to get there and what the conditions are like out west. And so the next group that goes out west, the pioneers that go in a larger group, they're the ones that are going to be looking for farms or whatever else, natural resources, following those trails that the mountain men established, mostly to get to Oregon and California, but not exactly all of them. And in general, most people would follow either the Oregon Trail or the California Trail, or they had one called the Santa Fe Trail that went to Santa Fe. They had a Mormon Trail that went to Salt Lake City, right? Like, people are creative when they name things. If the trail's got the name of the place, that's where it's heading. And a few 100,000 people are going to move west along these trails, usually starting in Missouri, either in St. Joseph or Independence, Missouri. Those are the two main starting points that are the last rail connections where you could take a train from anywhere else in the east to Independence, Missouri, for the most part, and then you could get on the trail from there. That's why in the game Oregon Trail they started Independence. And I mean, a lot of y'all that have played the game know that there's a lot of hardship on those trails, right? We're talking about probably about 6 months of journey overland in these wagon trains. And there's there's the Rocky Mountains you got to cross. There's a bunch of rivers you got to cross. You've got to worry about if there's any hostile Native American tribes that are around. You've got to worry about feeding yourself in an era before chemical preservatives and refrigeration and things like that. Best case, you've got dried meat like jerky, or you've got salted meat, and anything else you can carry for a long time that doesn't go bad. Some people brought livestock with them, both so they could set it up as farming when they got there, or so they could eat it along the way, right? Like a cow can walk with you until you get tired of it, or until you run out of grass and food and everything else, and then you kill the cow and you eat it. You've got problems with the weather, right? Like heavy snowfall in the Rocky Mountains could totally stop a wagon train for sometimes even months, right? And a lot of people end up dying from things like exposure and starvation on the trails. You've also got disease, right? You've died of dysentery, sudden poop explosion disease, the best way to go. And then the other thing is people, stuck on a wagon rolling across the prairies for months and months at a time. There's not a whole lot to do, so they had people that dealt with depression and things and boredom. But anyway, by the time they get to Oregon and California, a lot of them do find, cheap or sometimes even free land. They find plenty of other natural resources, and so those two states get settled really quickly compared to the Great Plains. And again, some of these people are really successful, especially once they find, gold in California. And there were plenty of other gold and silver strikes around the West. And the California gold rush really starts in 1848, but the news gets to everywhere else and people start flooding into California in 1849, which is why they were called 49ers. That's why the San Francisco football team still is called the 49ers, because it was close by. San Francisco is a place called Sutter's Mill, where they found the main gold strike. Then they have some more gold and silver strikes in Colorado, in the Black Hills in South Dakota by where Mount Rushmore is. And so tens of thousands of people start going west, mostly men at first, but they're going west to mine and try and strike it rich in these silver and gold strikes. And so you have a ton of mining towns that pop up, right? Most of them are fairly short-lived. Why? Because when the silver mine or the gold vein or whatever dries up, nobody stays in these mining towns, right? And so let's say that it's Deadwood, South Dakota, right? You have a silver strike, and everybody hears that there's silver in them Nar Hills, and there's an easy money to be made, and so you have thousands of people move in where this place might have been literally just a farm, a few weeks before, and now it's a so-called town of thousands of people that are mostly living in tents and other temporary buildings and stuff. So that's called a boom town, because overnight it just appears, right? Boom, there it is. And then when the mine dries up and everybody abandons the town, then it's called a ghost town. You do need to know what boom towns and ghost towns are. And there are dozens of boom towns, most of which turn into ghost towns around the Southwest and Montana and South Dakota and everything like that too. Some of them do succeed and become big-time cities later on, but a lot of them dry up. And you can usually tell what the boom towns are by the names. Sometimes it was named for something they actually found silver or gold. Sometimes there was people trying to discourage anybody from showing up. Leadville actually had a lot of silver. Although that's not really a lie, because silver and lead show up in the ground next to each other most of the time. Or Deadwood, that doesn't sound very inviting. It's a great TV show, sounds bad, but they had a lot of silver there. Anyway, long story short, because of all the gold and silver strikes and just the general opportunity and the nature of a fresh start in the West and everything, a lot of people start moving to Oregon, California, etc. And to illustrate that, in 1848, when we got California from Mexico, the population was about 14,000 people total. Okay. By 1860, only 12 years later, the population of California was over 380,000, right? So we're talking about a massive increase in people, mostly going out there to strike it rich, or whether that's gold or whether that's the farming opportunity or whatever. And then something else that's a bit last thing for today that we will talk about in the future is the impact of immigration on this as well. Like you've got a ton of people that are immigrating to the country and then going west, right? Like a great example would be Irish people coming to the eastern part of the United States and then going out and building the railroad, or Chinese immigrants coming to work in the gold mines in California and then ending up building the railroads because for the most part they were banned from working in the gold industry in California. But again, that's an issue for another day. Just kind of keep that on your radar. Anyway, that's where